Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammang sanghang namasami. Good afternoon, dear friends. Today we are looking into one of the most popular, lovable suttas in the entire Middle Length Discourses. That is the advice to Rahula at Ambalaṭṭhika. You could say the advice to Rahula in the mango grove. I'm going to put the sutta up on the share screen and we can read it together. This one is not as complicated as many to understand, but it still would be a miracle if we could truly and fully follow the advice given in this sutta. So it's worth listening to it, even if you've already heard it before. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel's feeding ground. Now, at that time, Venerable Rahula was staying at Ambalaṭṭhika. Then, in the late afternoon, the Buddha came out of retreat and went to Ambalaṭṭhika to see Venerable Rahula. Rahula saw the Buddha coming off in the distance. He spread out a seat and placed water for washing the feet. The Buddha sat on the seat spread out and washed his feet. Rahula bowed to the Buddha and sat to one side. Then the Buddha, leaving a little water in the pot, addressed Rahula. Rahula, do you see this little bit of water left in the pot? Yes, sir. That's how little of the ascetic's nature is left in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. You may know that it's said that Rahula was 7 years old at the time. He was already ordained as a novice. It's worth understanding what the significance is of a deliberate lie. That's sampajanya, with mindfulness, with clear comprehension, musawada, telling a lie with clear comprehension. In the some places, especially in the ethics related to lay people, the definition that's given for a lie, a deliberate lie, is if you're called to court to give a testimony in front of the court and you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, then if you tell a lie, that's definitely a fault. It's not necessarily 100% clear where the line is drawn between an unintentional lie or a white lie or somebody having a misunderstanding or they forgot what happened and they speak with forgetfulness or a lack of mindfulness, or even a person is not yet fully enlightened and so they are still ignorant of the Four Noble Truths. And because of ignorance, they could say something that's other than the truth. So the truth is an epithet for Nibbana. They say that Nibbana has an undeceptive nature. And but in this statement here, it's not clearly not saying that one has attained to the full comprehension of the truth by having the full noble attainment of Nibbana before one can be free of the fault of lying. So I would like to ask for your ideas or questions about where you would draw the line in making something an intentional lying with comprehension, which is the kind of fault that Buddha is pointing to here.
Aren't there 5 factors to determine whether something is?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, aren't there 5 factors to determine whether something is? Thanks a lot, Aya. On national TV. So maybe I can get the team to help me out if I miss one. Okay. So one factor is you have the knowledge that it's not true. Second factor is you have the intention to deceive the second person, the other person. And see now.
The third factor must be that there is another person.
There is another person, and you have the intention to deceive them. It's 2. And the third is you have the ability, the tongue, the speaking ability to do so. And you're using that speech to do so. Fourth is that they understand it to be, they think it's the truth, whether it is or not, they have the ability to comprehend it as true, even though it's false. And the 5th one?
The 5th one is that it's a person.
It's a person. Okay. Well, I got all 5. Sadhu.
So according to this, if I told you old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he had a cow or something like that, everybody would know that this is just a made-up story. And so that it doesn't have the intention to deceive. That's like one example of how something could be not truthful, but nevertheless it's not a lie. Okay. Damon, you have a question or an answer?
Could you repeat the question, please?
How do you distinguish the kind of lying with clear comprehension that the Buddha is scolding Rahula for, that destroys your spiritual path?
And can you point to the part in the sutta? I'm looking at my version of it from Sutta Central, but I'm not seeing the part about lying speech.
It's where the Buddha says, do you see the little bit of water left in the pot?
Uh-huh.
That's how little of the ascetic's nature is left in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie.
Okay, well, then I think then the operative word is deliberate. If you tell the lie with deliberation, as the last commenter mentioned, yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward, but is there a particular answer that's more complex?
Only that sometimes out of fear or something, like somebody broke something. Did you break that? And if you're frightened, you say, no, I didn't do it, or something like that. Actually, you did it, but because you're frightened, just then you didn't really think and deliberate about it. but because of not wanting to be in trouble.
Yeah, that's a good example. That's done without deliberation. So
Yeah.
it's not so bad.
I'm also remembering a story from Ajahn Brahm where he talks of a woman who's with her husband in the hospital. And
Uh-huh.
her husband's roommate had the same operation the day before and had died.
Uh-huh.
And the husband asked her how the roommate was, and she didn't want to frighten him before he went into surgery.
Uh-huh.
So she's told him he's fine, even though she knew he had died, but she didn't want to tell her husband that.
And Ajahn Brahm counts that as not being a lie?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just relating a story that he has mentioned. In the
Yeah.
paper.
Uh,
That's all I'm leaving it at that. You can take that, but that is a different way of also lying, but out of love and compassion and care.
yeah, do you think my robe looks all right?
Well, me, yes.
Yes, darling, it looks great. Um,
Brackets are on my answer because
Yeah,
other people have higher expectations.
It's like a wife asking a husband, do I look bad in this dress?
yes.
So not
Um, Yeah, so actually, there are many times in which indirect speech or like a hinting kind of speech is actually a kind or a skillful tactic, but it would be better to be sufficiently mindful to not tell a direct lie. Like if you really broke the teapot, to pause for that second so that you could think, did I or didn't I? And then face up to him and say, yes, I broke it. Even though it's frightening to do so. Sheila.
Good afternoon, Aya. What comes to mind is I have heard of cases where people have ill relatives, and frequently with pretty terminal or negative diagnoses, and to, I don't know, in their mind, I guess, save or lessen the blow for the ill patient and relative loved one, will change or somehow basically tell a lie about their diagnosis so not to create even more impact for that individual. And I guess that's what comes up for me. And it's a painful situation. They're trying to protect someone, but at the same time, that individual is not getting the full truth of their situation.
As far as the case of this seriously ill patient or this terminally ill patient, my knowledge and experience is that sometimes telling somebody there's no hope could be, or no hope for them to survive the illness, could cause a distress, or could make them more ill because of worried or something like that. But on the other hand, this is part of the skill of being a doctor, of knowing there's a certain stage at which they might be sugarcoating how serious the diagnosis is, but then there is another stage where it's more skillful and beneficial to acknowledge how serious the diagnosis is. Even the medical people in that case, if they think there's no hope, the medical people stop trying. And so if it's like this patient says, okay, I'm just coming here to die, then if you want the whole team to be making the effort, then you would kind of hold out the hope that they may be able to survive that illness. But at the right time, they should face, it should be okay at the right time to be able to speak about that death is coming.
I was just wondering if you could say something about, how, it's recorded that the Buddha was asked different questions about, where people were reborn and what was their rebirth. And there were times when it's recorded that the Buddha chose to delay answering that question until it was the right time, so,
Right.
So it's not to lie, but because of the wisdom to choose the right time to say what's actually true.
So these are coming to the factors of right speech. There's two lists about the factors of right speech. One is that what you're going to say is true. A second is that it's beneficial. A third is that it's told in a way which is kind or gentle. And then one is that if the speech has to be harsh, that it's told at the right time. So if the other person is not able to hear the criticism, there's not any use to, tell them the truth.
So for me, it's from my own experience as a layperson and a Buddhist. In ideal world, of course, you want to abide by all the rules, samavacha, all of it. Of course, it sounds so beautiful, and it's one thing, of course, when you're monastic, and let's say you're a layperson, and there are situations when you don't have to lie, of course, but if you don't lie, you lose your job. If you don't lie, like you don't get your medical insurance. If and yeah, and I know it from my own experience. And and also when it comes to morality, let's say Buddha, before he went on his journey to become enlightened, he did a very unwholesome thing. He actually left his son, right, his wife. It's like, if I would right now meet somebody who just abandoned his family, even for the higher purpose, just abandon. I mean, I wouldn't consider it as a wholesome deed, right? But now we're all sitting here speaking because we know for the fact he actually became enlightened, and now that's wholesome, So it's like, to me, all this morality is beautiful and ideal, but it all depends on situation, Sometimes you cannot do not lie, It's like, and you feel bad about it, but if you don't lie, it's gonna get only worse, Thank you. That's true of life,
Okay, Maureen?
I think if a patient who is seriously ill or even terminal asks you directly, about how serious they are ill, you have to answer them honestly, but also as a doctor, you don't know exactly when they're going to die. And they may be it gives them the opportunity to resolve any issues that they have with their relatives or friends. And if you don't tell them the truth, then they will die and wouldn't have done those very wholesome things for themselves and their relatives.
Thank you. This is our good insights about, the right time. Circling back to Nikolai's question, it is said that in the olden days, it would be very common for a man to go away on a journey for the sake of livelihood. They might be going out hunting, or they're going on a ship out trading or something like that. And while the wife and the children would be staying, like near the home or near the farm like that. That's one concept. Another idea is that in the olden times, there was an extended family system. So it wasn't just leaving a single mom with a child, but rather it was having an entire support system of the extended family available to take care. And then the third thing I can offer, I heard this from my teacher, Bhante Gunaratana. This is what he thinks that Rahula Mata, that his wife, Yasodhara, probably said, she said, "Darling, I know that you have a meditative character. You've been meditating ever since you were a child. You have this tremendous calling. I can see this calling. I only ask for one thing. Before you leave, would you please give me a child?" And then he gives her a child and then goes off on his spiritual quest. We also know that's not just a contemporary imagination, but from some of the early poetry that's the latest part of the early Buddhist texts has the poems of praise for some of the arahants. And according to that, Yasodhara was having a kind of a parallel existence to the Buddha, that while he was practicing his extremities, she was practicing extremities. While he was practicing meditation, she was practicing meditation. That she was, sort of like very like attuned to him and experiencing what he was experiencing during his quest. And then, of course, then 5 years after the Buddha's awakening, Yasodhara went forth together with the other women into the bhikkhuni form. So, but just coming back to this question about lying and skillful speech. So truth or falsehood is just one of the factors in skillful speech. There are all these other factors. So being the right time, being gentle, if possible, of being beneficial. Then if as a monastic, we have an occasion to speak something related to the Vinaya, to the rules and regulations of the monastic form. In addition to all of that, we also are supposed to examine whether we really have studied and understand what we're talking about. And we have to examine whether our own conduct is pure with regards to the thing that we're getting ready to point out. But I don't think that it will help on anybody's spiritual path if they tell an intentional falsehood in order to get insurance, to get a job, or to make a sale, or to have some kind of success in business. I think that is creating a opposite energy that will then have to be taken care of later on.
Can you also speak to deliberate lie and whitewashing or a white lie, and speaking to it relevant to hurting someone?
Right. Well, there's two cases. One is when a person is not mindful and they tell a falsehood, but they're not fully aware because they're being not unmindful. It's just by mistake. And that is not the same as a deliberate lie. And then the next part is lying out of kindness. And I believe that it's more skillful to, even out of kindness, to avoid telling a direct lie, to try to evade or avoid having to do this by speaking indirectly or changing the subject or something like that, or speaking, putting a different framework around the question. So if you say, do I look fat in this dress? You would say, well, the beauty of your good deeds is really big. Something like that. I said a couple of days ago that I think that lying is a gateway drug, and that once you start going down this path, you can do all kind of other unwholesome things and try to cover it up. And that's, I think, what the Buddha is pointing to. Now, I'd like to come back to the sutta. Then the Buddha turned the pot upside down and said to Rahula, do you see how this pot is turned upside down? Oh, wait a minute. Then the Buddha tossed away the very small amount of water that was left in the pot and said, do you see that little bit of water that was tossed away? Yes, sir. That's how an ascetic's nature is tossed away in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. So this is describing a circumstance where the lying becomes habitual. So instead of just happening one time, perhaps it happens more than one time. Then the Buddha turned the pot upside down and said, you see how this pot is turned upside down? Yes, sir. That's how an ascetic's nature is turned upside down in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. Then the Buddha turned the pot right side up and said to Rahula, you see how this pot is vacant and hollow? Yes, sir. That's how vacant and hollow the ascetic's nature is in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. Now, the next theme. Suppose there was a royal bull elephant with tusks like a chariot poles, able to draw a heavy load, pedigree and battle hardened. In battle, it uses its forefeet and hind feet, its forequarters and hindquarters, its head, ears, tusk, and tail, but still he protects its trunk. So the writer thinks this royal bull elephant still protects its trunk. It has not yet given its life. But when the royal bull elephant in battle uses its forefeet and hind feet, its forequarters and hindquarters, its head, ears, tusks, and tail, its trunk, the writer thinks this royal bull elephant in battle uses its forefeet and hind feet, forequarters, hindquarters, head, ears, tusk, tail, and its trunk. It has given its life. Now there is nothing that royal bull elephant would not do. In the same way, when someone is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, there is no bad deed they would not do, I say. So you should train like this. I will not tell a lie, even for a joke. That's what I was trying to say, that it's a gateway drug. Once you get started, you could lose everything. When they say not telling a lie, even for a joke, some monastics interpret that to think that we should not tell jokes. But if the joke is a story that's obviously fictional, to make some kind of a Dharma point, then it's not a lie. But if you, it's more like in the sense of vicious teasing, where you would say, that person is a criminal, And then when they accuse you of lying, you say, oh, it was only a joke. So where you have actually slandered somebody falsely. And then afterwards you say, oh, it was only a joke. So then it doesn't count. The Buddha is saying, don't do that. Now we come to the metaphor about the mirror. Now here's where the Buddha shifts from really terrifying little Rahula with these criticisms to, out of kindness, pointing the way that Rahula or anybody can avoid falling into this trouble. What do you think, Rahula? What is the purpose of a mirror? It's for checking your reflection, sir. In the same way, deeds of body, speech, and mind should be done only after repeated checking. When you want to act with the body, you should check on that same deed. Does this act with the body that I want to do lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both? It's unskillful. Atavyabhada is translated as distress. So is it leading to causing distress? Is it unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result? If, while checking in this way, you know, this act with the body that I want to do leads to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both, it's unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result. To the best of your ability, Rahula, you should not do such a deed. Now they come to the question of, like in the course of work, a lot of times in our work, they want us to be dishonest. So if you would tell a lie while you're on the job, and the result of the job is that you earn some more money, or you get a promotion, or you're able to keep your job, or you're able to protect the refugee that you have hiding in the basement, then we come to the kind of like well-known moral dilemmas that philosophers struggle with. And in this case, how to think about that? I think we better discuss this. Harming oneself, harming the other, or harming both. You could think that telling a lie is going to help another or protect another. But because of the moral stain that it puts on you, it hurts you psychologically and morally to tell the lie, but it helps the refugee that is hiding in the basement that doesn't get killed. So I invite your answer to this dilemma. Okay, Mita Kanti.
Well, one option is to accept that it's like a gray comma. Just accept that, okay, what I'm doing is not entirely pure, but it has a good chunk of goodness in this, perhaps, in the case of protecting someone. And then just dealing with it, I guess, just accepting it.
Because as monastics, our precepts are extremely clearly defined. It actually does happen sometimes that something is against the precept, but nevertheless, it's morally the right thing to do. For example, I'm reading the Sutta, giving this Dhamma talk that's going out onto YouTube. And people might be in a disrespectful posture, wearing shoes, wearing a hat, carrying a weapon, drinking beer while they listen to this Dhamma talk. And so it's a fault to speak the Dhamma to somebody who's not being respectful. But it's like for the greater good, now we're willing to put these Dhamma talks into space without making sure about that beforehand. And so we've, so then it becomes actually, if it's a technical fault of the Vinaya, then we can take care of it by acknowledging it as a fault. And what we try to do, if you try to do that, to avoid getting on the slippery slide to more and more faults, you try to look out for the circumstance where it will be not necessary to continue repeating the same kind of fault. So something like that could apply in the case of a lie, that we sincerely are really making the adhitthana if we have to tell a lie in order to protect somebody's life or something like that, that we make this determination that we're not going to make a habit out of lying. Damon.
Did you give the example already about a person with ill intentions who is looking for a person, and you tell them a lie so that you protect the person?
That was sort of my thought with the refugee, is that the police or the Homeland Security is coming to get them. And then they're going to be sent to Martha's Vineyard or something. Or they're going to be deported and put into an unsafe situation where their life would be at risk. Or else, could be even worse than that.
Okay, yeah, that was the obvious example that I thought that I was thinking of too. Thank you.
Okay.
Isn't everything based on intention? So if we had the right intention, lying is okay. It's better than being quiet and causing harm. Being quiet, so isn't there a balance? Isn't it okay to strike a balance between absolute truth, impact? So in the lay world, like Nikolai said, there's challenges, but we start with right intention. So we embellish our resume to get that job. That doesn't mean I'm stealing somebody's job. Everybody's doing it, and I know I can do this job. So I will embellish my resume. Or if there's some situation, I know this is bad, I will rather say something, even if not very skillful. I will leave it at that.
So I think what we're bringing out is it's not that simple. This is one point that I wanted you to give a full allowance to. It's not that simple. And in fact, luckily, I learned Catholic theology earlier in my life. And they had an example that was given about intention, that if you are challenged to a duel, and if you only wish to protect your honor, and then you go into the duel and you kill your adversary, but you weren't thinking about killing your adversary, you were thinking about defending your honor, according to this theory, that was not murder. That's according to that theory. Now, I think that's a misrepresentation. I think they go too far when they say that actually, if you point a gun at somebody, I don't want to point it at anybody, actually, point a gun at somebody and pull the trigger, that whatever other intentions you have, one of your intentions you have is to kill that person. And so if I do some plagiarism or embellish my resume or something like that, even though it's for a good cause, it is telling something that's not true. It is intentionally telling something that's not true. And whatever the result of telling the untruth will have a painful result for you and your karmic consequences. So then, especially if you're telling an untruth for self-gain, that's even more like a difficult to excuse. If you're telling an untruth to protect your baby or something like that's sort of like one thing, but telling an untruth to get ahead in work is something else.
So I was just thinking about the questions, the statement that
Mhm.
about not telling a lie, even not telling a deliberate. I was just thinking, like, why do we tell jokes? Like, the reason people tell jokes, from my experience, is to make the other person feel happy, feel better, to generate a certain kind of feeling. That's why we tell jokes, no?
Yes.
So, couldn't we then extrapolate that the Buddha was really pointing to using speech to generate a different feeling in the other person, whether it's to make them happy through telling the joke, or to make them relieved from sorrow, by saying there are no refugees in the basement.
Nevertheless, it's truthful if it's in accord with reality. And joking, it can be a way, like we said, something that's truthful often is difficult for the other person to hear. So if you can cover your difficult truths with humor, then that makes it more acceptable for them to swallow that bitter truth, because it's been surrounded by fear. So, like if we were trained that if we encounter a situation where something comes up that's racist or sexist or something like that, rather than just pointing the accusing finger, that sometimes with humor, you can undermine, you can make the point in a way that is able to be accepted. Whereas if you come back and you address it in a very severe way, then they would not be able to hear you. So that's part of skillful speech, but it doesn't telling a lie and a joke. Truthful, honestly, if we could avoid having the kind of work, if possible, that requires lying, if we could find a way to stand up for justice in a way that is not engaging in lying, that's more beneficial to us and more beneficial to society. Okay, one more question. Nikolai again.
It's this time it's not about lying in particular, but about samavacha, the right speech.
Mhm.
So it's so interesting. I was watching this video by John. I read the name. The Ajahn, one of the Ajahns, he just disrobed. He used to be the abbot of the monastery in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And he said that Buddha predicted that in 5,000 years, the Buddhism, the way he taught, going to completely disappear. Slowly, gradually, it's going to deteriorate. And at some point, even monks going to be holding only 5 precepts. And then it's just going to disappear. And now I'm just observing, talking about skillful speech. Let's say I'm in a Abhayagiri, I was in Abhayagiri, and then the monks cannot tell me, like, go pull out the weeds. So the Ajahn tells me, go consider that weed. He basically tells me, go pull it out, but he just uses the different word. But the action and intention is absolutely the same. So I'm looking at him, I'll go pull it out, no problem. Even you call it consider, but it's gonna, I'm gonna do the same thing, right? But he's looking at me like, I did it right way, I didn't tell you do the bad thing. So, and this point is like, it's skillful, but it's totally silly. And if you're not a silly person, you understand, right? Right? It's the same if I tell you, you tell me, oh, you took my money, you stole it from me. I say, I didn't steal it, I just borrowed it. I was gonna give it back to you. I'm skilled, So it's like at some point skillful becomes unskillful, and like playing these games of being skillful, it's like we get ourselves like these traps, It's like when I see, let's say, how Vinaya, some of the rules of Vinaya applied in 21st century, like monastics not allowed to use money, but then monastic makes the decisions how to spend money. That's all the job, but I supposed to click the button.
Yep.
It's like, what is this? It's called skillful, and this, by this example, me as a lay person, all I'm learning, I need to be tricky, not skillful. Yeah, sorry.
All of these things are true. And to the extent that we can avoid skating on the edge of hypocrisy is giving us a much better opportunity to reach the goal and to really obtain the internal purification. I think I'd like to go through the remainder of the sutta, and I don't regret spending this amount of time on this question, because the remainder of the sutta is really just a further development of the same idea. Okay, so if it's unskillful and you know beforehand that it's unskillful and leads to suffering, you should not do such a deed. If while checking in this way, this act with the body that I want to do does not lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both. This is harmlessness, which is one of the most highest and refined spiritual principles. In fact, if you had nothing else, if the only idea that you had in your spiritual practice was, let me be harmless, you could go a long way. You could even come to noble attainments if this was like your main practice of your life, was simply whatever is harmless, let me do it. And being pleased and quick to do something which is harmless is also an aspect of this instruction. In other words, not to be lazy and just forget about it. But if we see there's something to be done and this thing is harmless, yes, I can go ahead and do it. And then it goes similarly. While you are acting with the body, you should check on that same act. Does this act with the body that I am doing lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both? Is it unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result? If while checking in this way, you know this act that I am doing leads to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both, it's unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result. Then, Rahula, you should desist from doing such a deed. That means stop. So stop what you're doing if in the middle of doing you realize that it's harmful. But if while you're doing something and you're practicing this pachavekana, this reflection, while checking in this way, you know, this act with the body that I am doing doesn't lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both. It's skillful with happiness as its outcome and result. Then, Rahula, you should continue doing such a deed. And the word for happiness is sukha, which is the very wide, broadest word for happiness that has many levels of significance, from the simple happiness of a child at Christmas up to the happiness of an arahant. All of it can be called sukha. And then after you have acted with the body, you should check on that same act. Does this act with the body that I have done lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both? Is it unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result? And if, while checking in this way, you know, this act with the body that I have done leads to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both, it's unskillful with suffering as its outcome and result. Then, Rahula, you should confess, reveal, and clarify such a deed to the teacher or a sensible spiritual companion. And having revealed it, you should restrain yourself in future. But if, while checking in this way, you know this act doesn't lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or both, then you should live in rapture and joy because of this, training day and night in skillful qualities. I think we should pause and discuss for a few moments the value not only of deciding internally not to repeat that unskillful deed, but to also confide in a spiritual companion or a teacher about the unskillful deed. In this case, the Buddha is recognizing the powerful force of a habit, that the most strongest prediction of what you're going to do next is what you did before. So the force of habit is very powerful, and it takes a stronger counterforce to stop that force of habit from simply repeating itself over and over. And so then confiding in a spiritual companion is one way to shift the energy and providing a way to step out of the rut. Now, a skillful spiritual companion or a skillful teacher is somebody who's on your side. So they will be like the defense attorney. They will not be acting as the prosecution. So if you say, oh, I did something unskillful, the good friend is not going to be saying, yeah, no, you did something unskillful. You know, they're not Or they're not going to be coming back, the next week or the next month saying, remember that unskillful thing you did? No, that's not their aim is not to grind it in. Their aim is to get you out of it. And they would help you if they know about morality or about the precepts. They would help you consider, well, did you really fulfill all the factors of that fault? And maybe you didn't fulfill all of them, you just fulfilled some of them. And so then you don't have the full consequence of that fault. Or maybe like you intended well, but it didn't come out exactly as you were intending. And so then they would help you to inspect your, like if there was some lack of understanding or some a mixed motive or some other emotion that like caused you to do something unskillful, and to think about how you could change the underlying conditions so that you wouldn't have the conditions that cause you to do the same unskillful thing again. So they could help you in these ways to change the conditions in order to change the habit. And then the way of correction for most of the faults that we have in monastic life, your companion says, Venerable, do you see? And they say, yes, I see it. And I say, Venerable, you should not repeat that in the future. And then you just say, I undertake not to repeat that. And that's the completed disciplinary transaction. So you didn't have to go to jail, you didn't have to pay penance, you didn't have to skip a meal, anything like that. For the great majority of all of the faults that a person could have, it's the simple acknowledgement and undertaking not to repeat the same thing. I believe that at work, in court, and in the family, that the discipline should be that gentle, and the parent or the authority figure should be like your Kalyanamita, your beautiful spiritual friend, who is going to help you to get out of your bad habit, not the person who just wants to ostracize you or cause you to be harmed because of a mistake. And if we always had those kind of situations with loving and wise authority figures, then we would practice being honest about the small things. And having had this practice of being able to be honest and confidential about the small mistakes that we make in life, then it could be later on that something really terrible happens. Then we have like a big problem, and we have set such a pattern, such a beautiful, wholesome pattern of being able to be honest with each other in a way which is loving and kind. Then when that horrible large problem comes along, we still are able to be honest, having some faith, that we're going to be able to work it out, and it's not going to destroy the family or destroy my job or destroy society because somebody made a mistake and they acknowledged it. So I invite comments or questions about this. Damon.
Of course, now we're talking about a sort of a whole different topic of what, the importance of a skillful friend. I mean, a spiritual friend, but I see that it relates to how you can determine what is skillful in terms of right speech related to the Sutta. So, if you have a spiritual friend who's very well versed, I mean, the best thing is a monastic. If you can't find a monastic, then, a very matured Buddhist friend. But even then, it sounds like you can always rely on direct teachings from suttas, like the one I put in the chat is a direct, Buddha himself instructing monks. How do you know what skillful is? Skillful is is the avoidance of actions that are motivated by craving, aversion, and delusion. So I think those are pretty, you can really rely on the Buddha's actual words to define what is skillful.
Thank you.
Or should I say, is that true?
Yes. If you would just, in a way, like the precepts are a bit of like a shortcut. Like underlying the precepts is to avoid actions that are motivated by craving, aversion, and delusion. So every time a circumstance comes along, it might be more simplified if you just say, I don't kill. Rather than to reflect about it and say, is it possible even to kill a being without aversion? And reflecting about it and saying, no, that like aversion is almost intrinsic to killing. I would have to have a disregard for that life before I could kill it. And therefore aversion is present and therefore I should not kill. So instead of having to go through that self-examination and extended thought to bring up that wisdom, if we have taken the precept, I don't kill, then that's helps to get there quicker. But it's not a substitute for doing that internal examination of what the motivation is.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go on with the sutta. So this very same pattern about bodily actions is repeated with respect to speech that I want to do, which leads to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both. Exactly the same pattern. But if it's harmless speech can be repeated again and again. It won't come to any harm. Elsewhere in the suttas, that they say, engaging in a harmless activity, harmless activities of the body, harmless activities of speech, harmless thinking, you can allow those thoughts and actions to go on, but then eventually it becomes tiresome to be continuously doing things. And then the mind is prepared to go into the stillness of meditation, to the stillness of samadhi. And so the right time to stop doing those good deeds is when it's when the mind is ripe and ready to stop that level of activity to go into samadhi. Similarly, I think we need to acknowledge that there are an act of the mind that leads to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both. And I would encourage you to consider this, especially the kind of acts which are like rehearsing some kind of speech that you want to make, or rehearsing some kind of action that you want to take, or planning about some kind of action that you want to take. That's where there's the strongest level of intentionality. When some kind of like a emotion comes up and you just feel, I hate that, or I want that, because of an emotion that has come up, but you haven't yet started to make plans or to think, what would it be like to get that thing that I want? At that point, it's karmically pretty weak. Now, later on, after you've had like a breakthrough to stream entry and you're in training, and when you really know the danger of greed, hatred, and delusion, then even an emotion that comes up that is in the department of greed, hatred, and delusion, there's a kind of because you've experienced like, what's the taste of freedom from all that? And then you will be repelled and disgusted by that unskillful, unwholesome, toxic, poisonous emotion or poisonous thought that popped into the mind. It came up from the subconscious into the conscious mind. And as soon as you recognize it for being unwholesome like that, then you do immediately want to put it away. And this is a very high, advanced practice. It's truly the practice of somebody who's a trainee, meaning somebody who has had stream entry, someone who's had gotten a vision of nibbana, who's gone past the first, like, the gross levels of deception and delusion. If someone is not yet at that stage, they could become too much like a self-punishing themselves, because those unwholesome emotions or unwholesome thoughts, because we've got so much momentum with our negative karmas of the past, that we're really truly not able to stop those negative, unwholesome things from bubbling up out of our subconscious into our conscious mind. And at that point, if you think that you've done a wrong deed, every time something like, as I said, bubbles up, then you will be too hard on yourself. You'll become too self-punitive. And at that point, I think it may be better to just acknowledge that because of causes and conditions, this tendency exists in me. I see it. I'm not going to pick it up. I'm not going to plan with it. I'm not going to harbor it. I just recognize that it's come up. And as soon as I recognize it, I let it go. But I don't think that because of that, I've failed in executing the intention of this sutta. So before you pick up that unskillful thought and start to run with it by way of planning or fantasizing or imagining or rehearsing, that's the time to put it down. Or while you're in the middle of that planning, that fantasizing, that imagining, then put it down. Or afterwards, don't repeat it. It's the same process. But then later on, even the first bubbling up, you could say, "Oh, it's not, this mind is not yet purified. What is the work that I still have to do to become fully realized, so that these kinds of negative things will not come again?" And so then we would do that work. So, Rahula, you should train yourself like this. I will purify my physical, verbal, and mental actions after repeatedly checking. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Rahula was happy with what the Buddha said. So now, again, I invite comments and questions. Here's a question in the chat. what to say about living in poverty in an unjust system and keeping the precept to receive food help. People receiving government food are supposed to reveal anyone that helps them by sharing food or even giving them a gift card at the grocery store to purchase food, the full amount of the food benefit, not really enough to feed oneself. Yeah. So it's so difficult to keep track of these things for many people, such as those with cognitive issues. This is something that, as a matter of a policy of cruelty, sometimes they've made the hurdles and the reporting that a person has to do to qualify for public assistance extremely complicated and difficult, so that the majority of those who actually are qualified for the assistance don't get the assistance because they're not able to complete the paperwork, right? And the system is full of cruelty, and one should be able to protest. And if we live in a democracy, we could get the government to overturn those kinds of cruel and excessive procedures to design the welfare system so that people who need welfare are able to get welfare. Lying to survive. See, what's happened is, if they force somebody to lie in order to survive, they're imposing a moral injury on that person. So that person does take a moral injury by lying. It's almost the same as if you put them as a gladiator in a combat to the death with the other gladiators and say, if you want to live, you have to kill. And if someone kills in order to survive, they would have survived, and they also would have received a wound. They've received a moral wound. It's the same thing if someone is drafted into the army and they're put under orders that, you must participate in this killing system because you've been drafted and it's the law, you have to do it. They've imposed a serious moral injury on that person. So then afterwards, a person should try to overcome that moral injury to them, to their own psychology. If someone has been forced to kill, they may undertake some activities to protect life for the sake of, and also making the determination as soon as they're able to stop killing. If someone is forced to lie in order to survive, then afterwards, maybe they should undertake some other kind of activity to protect the truth and to speak the truth and to do things in favor of honesty in order to overcome the negative karma that they would have accumulated by the lying that they did, even if they were forced to do it because of the circumstances or an unjust system. Nevertheless, it did cause a stain on their karma, and they should, as soon as they're able to, they should make the resolution. I heard that the Buddha recommends not lying. I shall undertake from now on forward. I will not lie again. And that's how to overcome a bad karma that was done before. Okay. Yeah.
we have anything that's the kind of mental obsession repeatedly, and have a strong emotional pull to do something. For example, maybe for a minor reason, you want to impress the teacher you really admire. So you go up there, you constantly rehearsing what words you want to like say, and you feel like you have a good impression. And the teacher could have a good impression of you, even if it's kind of not being harmful, but you, I do feel like you're suffering attached to it. You constantly with a mental obsession, the fear of not being accepted, or you want to look good in the community you just love. You want to be, you feel the sense of belonging. You want to be part of it, and you don't feel secure in the community. You want to do something to make yourself look good, even if it's a good thing. Should I pursue what I was rehearsing, planning to do, a good thing to impress the community, or sometimes I don't know what to do, because sometimes the pull is very strong. I feel like that's the right thing to do, but it doesn't feel right completely. So I'm kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah. This question, as I understand it, the Buddha was, again, it's very, at one level, it's so simple. Just try to do what is not harmful to the best of your ability. At another level, when we acknowledge the danger of righteousness, having very strong, ideas about how things ought to be, then it's like every place we go, we see dangers. Even trying to do good things, we see that it could be a danger because our motivation is not completely pure. There's a mixed motive. And so in that case, we're truly acknowledging that, like, it's because of causes and conditions we took a human birth, and the human situation is not a pure situation. There's a lot of mixture of different kinds of motives, and just do the best we can. And if there are mixed motives, try to emphasize or lean towards the ones that are cleaner, more pure, and the ones that are selfish or something, don't feed the ones that are bad, like that.
Couldn't we also say, that the question, couldn't we also say that just the very seeing of the fault, seeing the mind that's kind of has a mixed motive, is already a certain level of wisdom that's beginning to develop?
Yes.
And, as you were asking the question, for at some point I was thinking about the Without Blemishes Sutta in the beginning of time, where, the Venerable Sariputta, I believe, was describing how if you know that there is a blemish in me, that's better than having a blemish and not knowing. It's a higher level of wisdom. So, I mean, we all see that happening, at different times, where the mind starts with a pure motive and then some sneaky little kilesa kind of worms in a little bit. But that, I think for me, the trust develops more and more in knowing that, oh, there's power in seeing that. And by when we keep seeing that thing operating that's not wholesome in its subtler and subtler forms, that seeing has kind of a power, and it's like a light that's shining in that dark corner And it then makes it impossible for that particular kilesa to keep growing because we spotted it, we're onto it. And so I just wanted to offer that.
Okay, dear friends, is this enough? You satisfied with today? Then we can bring this meeting to a close and close by paying respects to the Triple Gem. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantam Abhivadin Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Again, thank you everyone for your patient listening.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you,
Thank
Aya.
you, Aya. Thank you very much, Venerable. Thank you, Aya. Thanks, everyone.
Aya, can you take one more, can you address my question privately?
Okay, if everybody else will go away, then
No,
can-
I know, no, it's just a continuation of Carwyn's discussion, so it's not private. I just meant post
Oh.
the official time. If you could just say a few more words about Carwyn's dilemma or Hobbesian choice, because I was very satisfied that you said the way to define carelessness is very simple. Just look at the 5 precepts. And I'm willing to just go with that and run with that from now on. So to bring up these exceptions, like the case of government food stamps, I feel it's very compassionate, but there's always something you could do instead. You could use non-governmental food banks, for example, where you don't have to lie.
unless the food bank runs out of food, which is what's happening these days.
Oops,
There's so much-
okay.
So I would like to suggest that when we have to just make the effort, and it depends on where we are. I'll give the advice. This is the Quaker advice. William Penn's friend was appointed as the Sergeant at Arms of the Congress of the Colony of Pennsylvania. And the Sergeant at Arms is required to wear a sword. And as a Quaker, he's a pacifist. So he said, how can I accept this job and wear the sword since I'm a Quaker? And the advice that William Penn said, wear it as long as you can. And when you can't wear it any longer, put it down. And so when somebody is forced to do, to violate a precept in order to survive, they may violate that precept until their priorities shift into such a way that they find a different way out of the situation. And
Okay, yeah, that's good.
When you emerge from wrongdoing into harmlessness, it's as beautiful as when the clouds separate on the full moon night, and we can see the beautiful full moon that has become visible when the clouds have separated and gone away. Okay, so that's all. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu.